Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar by Silwood Technology. And delighted today to be joined by Nicola Askham, who is a world-renowned data governance specialist. Everywhere I go these days, I seem to meet up with Nicola at various events and conferences and whatever. So we're delighted to welcome her to this webinar today. The topic of what we're going to talk about is the value and the challenges of metadata, particularly in the context of a corporate digital or data transformation project, whatever you call those big initiatives. And really, we met at an event recently, and what prompted this conversation was a previous conversation I had with a senior IT specialist or manager from a vendor company who questioned the value of metadata at all. He said the real value of information is in the data, and that metadata wasn't particularly valuable. It was a sort of a need to have. It wasn't anything that he felt was particularly important. Obviously, from where we are at Silwood, I would disagree with that, because we make a living out of helping organizations and partners work with their application metadata. So Nicola and I are going to talk about that today and see if we can uncover some of the real value behind the metadata in your applications to help you with your transformation programs. So welcome, Nicola, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, I'm looking forward to repeating our conversation, perhaps a little bit longer than last time.
That's right. Yeah. So I think what might be helpful is before we start on where the value is in metadata, and what it might be best if we sort of had a brief chat or a brief discussion on what's the definition of metadata. I think there's a number. So I remember I did a little bit of research, and there was something how the word meta could be interpreted as somehow self-referential. And how meta is also a Greek word, which can mean beyond or after or even above, at a higher level, things like that. So where would you sort of put the definition of metadata in the context of IT rather than Greek philosophy, I suppose?
Yeah, I was going to say, I love that, thinking about it in that way, but I don't know whether it's very useful in a day-to-day.
Yeah, exactly right.
I think obviously the flippant answer is the standard definition of metadata is it's data about data. But if you're a business user, or possibly even the IT manager you were talking to, they just kind of go, what does that mean? So I always like to say that it's the data that helps us understand what that data is. And make it useful. So it's going to be the obvious basic things about the definition, what does this data mean, but it's also going to be some other things about it, and that's going to possibly depend on whether we're talking about what I would call technical metadata or business metadata. So from a business metadata point of view, you absolutely want to know what does that data mean. You might want to understand, what do we use it for, who's the data owner, who's the data steward, all things that are going to make it easier for us to use this data correctly in a business context. Mm-hmm. But if you're IT, you're going to want to know much more technical metadata, like what system is it on, but not only what system, but what table, what column, and all sorts of, is it alpha or digital, or is it a variable length allowed and nulls allowed? Things that business users ordinarily wouldn't want to know.
No, I think that's right, and I think it is. One can become a little bit too theoretical about it, whereas in fact it has very practical uses, and so having a practical definition is exactly right. So thanks for that. And I guess going back to that conversation I had with that gentleman from the vendor was why do we need to be aware of the importance of metadata, given that it gives that meaning and that context to data itself? Why do we need to be, or why is it helpful for us to be aware of that? I think, importance of it.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think everybody just assumes that everybody knows what this data is. And we will just get the right data. But I've come across so many instances, including like in the really early days when I was doing data governance, where people just get the wrong data, and they didn't do it deliberately. When I was just starting out my data governance career, I worked for a bank, and the Bank of England queried a return we'd done saying that all our corporate clients, we were lending to them on overdraft. And the Bank of England quite rightly said, really? We really don't believe this, considering the sums involved. And
I can imagine.
we'd had a consultancy in to help us build this data mart to meet some regulatory requirements very quickly. And because in those days we didn't understand the value of our metadata, they just found a field that said date. So they thought, it must be the right date field then. So they took the date field, and it was the annual renewal date, not the facility expiry date. So the annual renewal date is always by definition going to be a year or less. So it switched all our lending into short-term lending. The Bank of England didn't trust our reports for a few years after that.
I can imagine.
And you know, so I mean, it's humorous to look back on it. It was very stressful at the time, and we spent a lot of time trying to work out what had happened. And I think you come across numerous instances of this where I think, you know, I'm the eternal optimist. I think on the whole, people don't go to work to do a bad job, but good people make bad decisions because they've been given the wrong data. And I think that happens probably almost as much, even more than poor quality data. So I think this metadata helping us really understand that we have the right data, we understand it, makes so much difference to us. And from a technical side, we need to understand how that data is set up and held, because you know, perhaps it wasn't so relevant 20 years ago, but these days we're moving our data, we're transforming it, we're aggregating it, and you know, and we need to understand what it is we're trying to aggregate. Otherwise, we're going to do the wrong thing, and we're going to mess up our data.
Given that, you know, businesses are data driven, I think businesses have always been data driven, or they should have been data driven in terms of making decisions based on the data available to them. And whether that was back in the 1920s or 30s, when everything was done on, you know, paper ledgers and people writing things out and adding pounds, shillings and pence up in 3 columns and all that in those days, or whether it's today where we've got huge amounts of data, possibly arguably very little information, but tons of data and an almost uncountable number of ways of analyzing that in different ways. So what does all this mean in the, you know, in the context of a business or an IT function? What does, you know, where does the business gain value from metadata, do you think? Where's that?
So, I mean, I think there's a number of different things, really. I mean, the obvious one, since I obviously came from a financial services background and still keep getting pulled into it, is that, you know, there are so many regulations that require data governance, and usually in that they're asking for, it depends, if you go all the way back to Solvency II, they called it a directory of data, but a lot of people are now asking for a data catalog or a data glossary or a they're all meaning the same things. They want you to prove that they know you're giving them the right data. And it's not just financial services now. All sorts of sectors, the higher education sector, the housing association sector, you know, all sorts are now going down this route. They've realized that they can't expect these organizations to get the right data, or they can't trust them unless they've got some proof that they really have sent the right ones, that they are not making the kind of mistakes that I was alluding to. So I think obviously compliance is going to be a big driver. I prefer obviously the carrot approach rather than the stick, but you can't not mention the compliance. And I think the big one is this confidence in data. I mean, I'm going to do a keynote for an organization next month where the whole thing is called trust in data. It's getting people to really trust that they have the right data to do their jobs and make their decisions. So I think it's this confidence that we have the right data. I think a lot of people don't actually think about data being part of their job. Some of us data geeks do, but it's usually a very small percentage of people in any organization. We've got to get, you know, people don't think about the data. They don't actually even think that perhaps some of these manual workarounds or this keep going back and double checking things is even a problem with the data. So I think actually once we start getting metadata captured and shared, it really helps people have that confidence that they're
Yeah.
using the right data and not perhaps reporting the wrong things to the wrong people. And I think that obviously leads to better decision making. I've got an example of an organization I worked with a few years ago who, again, the data quality was fine, but they made a decision based on a report they were given that one of their parts of their business was loss making, and they made the decision to close it down. They subsequently found out that that was correct data, but it wasn't on the basis that they thought it was. It included some data from another department which skewed it. And they've closed down a loss-making part of their business. And, and this is just crazy. So,
Yeah.
and again, I don't, the people that made that decision were very senior people in the organization. They were not stupid people by any stretch of the imagination, but they trusted the data, which led to poor decision making. So, that caused that organization to embark on their data governance journey.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that, perhaps because of this lack of confidence in our data, perhaps, people have experienced some things like that, maybe not quite to that extreme, but there's always little things like that going on in an organization, that people waste a lot of time and effort chasing after accurate data. I've heard of organizations where, the data is really bad when you get it out of the data warehouse, but 5 different teams have it and they all cleanse it in their own way, but obviously differently. And then people ask them the same, like a similar question, like, how many customers meet this criteria? And they all come up with different answers. And then we waste weeks as they argue about why their number's right and nobody else's is. And you're thinking, how much effort was wasted to not even duplicate, but that times 5 times the effort was going on in cleansing the data. If we could have actually just all understood what data we had, where it was, and get it right in one place, think what we'd save. So I think from a business point of view, there's so much value. Sometimes a little bit harder to convince the business it is a good thing because say they don't think about their data. But I think it's really useful for IT as well because, I'm a data governance person. I'm all about talking to people about the business owning the data, the business being up to date with it. That doesn't mean that IT have nothing to do with the data. They've got to maintain it whilst it's on the IT supported infrastructure and systems. And that means moving it, transforming it, aggregating it in accordance with the business's wishes. But we can't determine those wishes just in quick emails from somebody. We've got to have a way of documenting it so that it's available to everybody so that we don't keep going back and chasing our tails every time we have a question about the data. And I think this allows us to integrate our systems better, to get things right in the first place. I got into data governance from being a project manager implementing a data warehouse. And, I used to get so frustrated with people saying, we don't need data governance. We'll just dump it in the data warehouse. And you go, but we don't know if we've already got some data like that. If we've got some data like that, perhaps we should join it together and get some better insights. But we don't know that if we haven't actually captured and documented our metadata. So I think that's really important. And, the thing I see time and time again is that a new system's launched in an organization, and IT start up the project, and the business analysts go to like you as the business user and say, so Roland, what data do you want in this system? And you say, well, I want this, and this. And they'll either go and recreate data when it might already be held in the organization on another system, or or they'll go and, even worse, buy the same external data that's already being bought by the organization somewhere else.
I've seen that.
Because it's not being documented. So I think there's so much efficiency and, even agility in meeting the business requirements, because we don't have to go and reinvent the wheel every time. We could just look up what we've already got and say, great, you want these 10 bits of item. 10 items of data, like if we wish, but let's just say only 10 bits of data in this system, Roland, and we've already got 5 of them. Can you just verify and confirm these are the right 5? Great, and we'll go and source the other 5 for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's right. I think it's and I think it's this trying not to have 2 groups, business and IT, I think data and possibly metadata should, it should help them to come together, to enable the better use of data, to understand what we've got, where it is, what it looks like, how it's defined, so that we can use it better for the good of the business or the good of the organization, rather than thinking, well, I'm business, I don't need to worry about it, and I'm IT, you're not allowed anywhere near it. And there's sometimes that challenge, shall we say. I remember many years ago selling what used to be called an executive information product, executive information systems. I think you'd now call them BI analytics, whatever. And I remember going to talk to someone in IT. The business were our sponsors, and we went to talk to someone in IT about putting this product in and all the rest of it. And they said, why do they need to know this? Why does this is our data? I was talking to the sort of finance IT team, and it was like, this is our data. Why does this particular department or particular group of people need this information? So it was very parochial, and people guarded their data. And I don't know whether that attitude still exists, but it was a bit of an eye opener at the time.
I think sadly it does still exist.
Why do they need it? Yeah. Okay. So if we agree that metadata is of real value to the business in helping them understand what data is, what they've got, how it's defined, what its use case might be, how it's potentially linked to other data, etc. And it's also of great value to IT in being able to help them manage that data landscape, that ecosystem more efficiently, more effectively, and support the business more effectively. What are some of the challenges, do you think, that arise with getting value from that metadata across this sort of enterprise data landscape? Because so many people now are talking about an enterprise data landscape, ecosystem, and digital transformation and all the rest of it, which is all very laudable. It's that, but how are we going to get, or what are the challenges associated, or some of the challenges associated with getting the value from the metadata, or even getting hold of it, I guess? But
yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it kind of reflects the reality of it. There are some of us that just understand why we need our metadata, and everybody else kind of looks at us like we got three heads or are talking a foreign language at them, because as far as they're concerned, they know what their data is and they're just getting on with it. And I think it's that kind of human nature things. Like, I think every new client I work with goes, oh, we're such a siloed organization. You'll have never worked with such a siloed organization. And you clearly agree with every new client, but that everybody is as bad as everybody else. I think it is our nature, human nature. That we work out what we do, and it comes back to what you're saying. It's my data. Nobody else needs to know about it anyway. So but we're not working in that kind of world now. We're working in a world where we've got huge volumes of data, but we can get much more insight and value out of it if we integrate it and combine it, and even interrogate it, get some insight on it. So we're now then, those of us that get it are going out there to the business and going, right, we need to get all this information out of your head, or even, to be fair, the same to IT. And they're kind of saying to you, but I've been doing this job years and we've never had this. I know what we're talking about. It's only you don't know what I'm doing, but you're not doing my job, so it doesn't matter. And I think this is the trouble, because, how much data does an average organization have now? You can't say, I know what, we'll print off an Excel sheet of all the fields on, let's even say, just one database, send it to everybody and go, well, could you just fill in the definitions on this, because it's going to be thousands and they're going to look at you like you've lost the point entirely. So I think the challenge is, where do we start? How can we make this easier for people and more accessible? And perhaps we don't do everything, just the most critical data or the most critical systems to begin with. So I think that is really hard, because it's genuinely, people do know what they mean. It's just, it's in their heads. And I think one thing that often, I actually do it in my training course, is that I tell people how important it is to define things properly, because we all understand things differently. And people go, yeah, right. And I go, right, I'm going to do this exercise. I want everybody to close their eyes. I'm going to say a word, and I want you all to visualize what it is. And I get them to close their eyes. I change the slide and I say the word is dog, as in D-O-G. I want you all to visualize a dog. And then when they open their eyes, they see the slide of my old border terrier. And, 9 times out of 10, everybody, I go, did you see that dog? And they go, no. I saw my golden retriever or my friend's beagle or whatever. And I'm going, but I meant that dog. And I go, and, we all agree, if we said we can't use the word dog without having it defined, everybody would laugh, because everybody knows what a dog is. Don't be stupid. But we don't all mean the same by dog. We tend to associate with the breed that we either currently have had, or our friends or our neighbors or something. So we've got to get people to understand that they genuinely know what they mean, but perhaps what they mean by customer is not the same as what I mean by customer, or what you mean by customer, Roland. We could have 3 different definitions of customer, and if we're lucky, we probably have more than that in any usual organization. So I think that's really hard.
Yeah.
And then
is a customer someone that's bought something and stopped using it, not yet actually bought something, but maybe about to buy something? There's all sorts.
Exactly.
There are lots of definitions just off the top of my head of customer.
Exactly. And then it gets even more complicated, because even the smaller companies that I work with these days have so many different systems in place. And we've potentially got, so let's say, stick with customer. We've potentially got customer data on more than one system.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't even know whether we're using the same definition on all of those systems, or even within the system. It's quite scary when you realize that sometimes things go wrong because you and I are using the same field, but slightly differently, because we thought it meant slightly differently. These things are not normally apparent until you start doing things like data governance initiatives and capturing the metadata. And then I've written my definition, and you look at it and go, that's not a customer, Nicola. And we enable then those conversations and discussions to try and work out what it really should be. But I think the whole variety of systems we've got just makes it really hard. We've got hopefully over the years we've had data dictionaries as we've implemented each new system, but sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't. Some have been generic standard ones given to us by the vendor. Some companies, and still do, like to build their own systems for things, and they may not have been so diligent right to them. So you can see we got like metadata or potential metadata coming in from so many different directions, some of it like manual from people's head, and then we've got it from so many different systems. And then you don't even get started on like perhaps the unformatted data that you can get, these or unstructured, social media, images, videos. It's a big challenge. So even if you can convince your business and your IT people that we really need to capture this, you then explain all this to them, and you can see them going, yeah, that looks like the we'll put that in the too hard to look at pile. Blown my mind.
And there's no, I don't know if you'd agree, there's no common language, there's no lingua franca or Esperanto or whatever you want to call it across the whole of the IT industry about, not even a definition of metadata, yet let alone, a common set of structures and definitions. I mean, it just wouldn't, I don't think it would be possible, but there's too much, and there's too much variety. And we've all gone too far anyway. I think you can't start. Let's all throw everything out and start again. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I remember because of Solvency II, I spent 5 years, a few years back, only working with insurance companies. And the last one I worked with, they didn't put a lot of resource on the project. So every time I popped in, not much had happened. And I kind of said to them, look, you're not going to meet the deadlines because you've got these certain things to do, and you're just not progressing them. And I'm only here like 1 day a week or whatever. And you need more resource. And they went, oh, okay. And they took it really seriously. And the next time I popped in, they went, you've got more resource. We've given you a project manager and a business analyst. And I went, that kind of wasn't what I wanted. I wanted a data governance person, but okay, I'll go with that. And the project manager goes, we've been thinking about this, and we've solved it because we need all this metadata. So we need some data definitions from this particular area, but they're really busy. It was a particular time in the quarter where that team would always be particularly busy.
Yeah.
So they can't talk to us, but there's a new chap just joined their team from another insurer. And because they're so busy with their quarter end process, they've just started to do some other work. So we've asked him to write the definitions to fast track it. And I went, that's not going to work. Oh, yeah, it is, because he came from another insurer. And I went, yeah, I've worked with loads of insurers. They don't mean the same thing with the same terminology. And they kind of told me not to be so silly, and they were so pleased with themselves for finding this fast track solution. And of course, he spent a considerable amount of time. He was very helpful, bless him, writing these definitions, which we then shared with the team. When it calmed down, they went, well, that's wrong. So, and I think that happens time and time again, not just insurance, in every industry. As you say, everybody's got slightly different meanings for things. So it would be wonderful if we had some standards, but I just don't think it's possible. Or even the one thing I like to say, because I quite often, clients will say to me, we need one common language or a tribal language or some language, like that. And I'll go, should we just start for definitions? And they said, what do you mean? I said, because until we started capturing these from our systems, from people's heads, we don't actually know where we've got disparity. So I'd rather go for definitions first and perhaps have a standard way of doing one organization as perhaps an aspirational goal later, once we've actually understood that you mean something different from customer than me, and we get together and agree, can we agree on one definition, or do we need two different fields and it's a different thing for whatever reason?
No, that's right. And doing that, leads to all sorts of other challenges in terms of, well, if we need two more fields, we've got to change this application and change that, and how does that impact other things down the line? So I know we're coming to the end now, slowly, and there are a couple of questions that have arrived in the chat, but before I get to those, I introduced you as a specialist in this area, so I'm duty bound to ask, I guess, have you got 2 or 3 nuggets of advice you might sort of care to share for an organization about how they could approach getting value from their metadata in this context of their data governance initiatives?
So, where would I start? I think obviously the one thing
at the beginning, probably.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's kind of one thing I think we kind of mentioned earlier is that, don't try and boil the ocean. I think when organizations suddenly, somebody has that light bulb moment, understands they really do need to understand their metadata properly. They do kind of want to do all or nothing kind of thing. And I think I was like that in the early days. I was very naive and enthusiastic and just thought I could persuade everybody. You're asking a lot to try and capture all that in one go. So I think it's try and find something that's useful, and something where you really can demonstrate the value. And that might be to solve a known problem. It might be that you are having a new system, perhaps you're having a new ERP, perhaps you're having a new data warehouse, data lake, whatever. And it might be that you say, well, actually, as part of building that, we're going to capture all the metadata and make sure it's correct before the data goes in it. That could be a thing. I think, it's this, and there are, tools that can help you with the metadata, but I think people need to remember that tools are great. Don't get me wrong. I'm definitely not against tools. They are very valuable and very useful, but your shiny new tool can't solve bad data. So I think you have to remember that, the people and the process side are as important, and dare I even say more important than the technology. We've got to get some of these definitions currently only reside in people's heads. and we need to get them out. But the tools can be very, very useful for capturing what is already embedded into the database. But I think it's that don't forget the people side of it. You know, there's only so far you can go. And I've had people say, oh, look, we've collected this metadata using this tool, so we're all done. And then you look at it and the business will go, well, that's not right. I don't agree with that. So you've got to get the whole thing all together would be my top for it.
Okay, thank you. That's been really helpful. I think that certainly for me, having worked in IT and data and integration for many, many years now, more years than I care to mention, I think one of the things that is often forgotten in the rush to acquire the shiny new toys is people. And there's always been this people, process, and technology, and the people aspect is often under the value of that is underestimated, or the importance of that is underestimated, particularly around change, because what we're talking about with data governance programs, with data initiatives, with new tools is change, and some people are resistant to change. Some people, it makes them anxious, or they feel a little bit unnerved by it. And so we have to, as you know, people in whatever area we work, and you must see this all the time with your coaching and training and consulting work, is that how do you take people with you and help them to feel comfortable about the direction and their part in it, and the importance of people rather than the shiny stuff and all the rest of it, without making it seem like this is just a process for the sake of the process, rather than something that's of actual value. But
absolutely.
Okay, so thank you for that. I think we've had a couple of questions coming in. Oh, this is an interesting one. I think I'll pass this one back to you. Do you recommend starting with a particular type of application in your sort of metadata discovery or metadata?
Would I do it based on type? I wouldn't necessarily choose where to start by type of application. I'd probably choose on what's the most pressing business needs. So if you are implementing, I've been working with a client that's been implementing an ERP recently, and they're a massive organization, many different parts, and the ERP is to bring together HR and finance data across the wider organization. So clearly they're worrying about that, because they need to make sure that when they're combining data from across the various different parts, that it is the same data. So in that case, yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, if ever anybody's implementing an ERP, you absolutely should do it. But I think it depends on where your organization is focusing at the moment. If they're focusing on something else, you know, you've got to make sure that what you're choosing first aligns with that. You don't want to be going off. I think we quite often get accused of doing things for best practice. So you don't want to be going after your ERP system and saying, we've got to do metadata for this, if the ERP system's been in for 5 years and there's no known problems with it. You've got to be kind of, what's the current set of challenges? Where are they coming from? And help to identify the right application from that.
So thank you. I think that's, yes, it's making sure you start with the end in mind for something that is particularly important. So yeah. And then there's two questions which I think I can answer sort of together almost. So what are the most complex types of applications? So I'll sort of answer that, because we deal with metadata discovery, I suppose. And then someone saying we have SAP applications which are important to us. What data catalogs work best with SAP? So, well, typically what are the most complex in our experience, and as I said, we work with organizations and lots of partners who are engaged in data transformation, data governance initiatives from the shiny new toy end, I suppose, with our product. But the large ERP applications from SAP and Oracle and people like that, and even the larger Salesforce or Dynamics applications, tend to be the more complex, mainly because of the way they're structured, but they have they have typically an SAP system will have, say, 100,000 tables and 1 million attributes in its data model before you even start to add custom fields or tables or whatever to it. And I would challenge anyone to be able to have a picture in their head of 100,000 tables. And 1 million attributes and how those are linked to the related to each other and all the rest of it. So those are typically the most complex because they fulfill the most complex needs within an organization, which is to run the finance, HR, the ordering, distribution, manufacturing in hopefully one package or very few packages. So those are typically the most complex and certainly they're the ones that we focus on, but they are the most complex and provide the biggest challenge, I think. So SAP is one of those. So which data catalogs work best with SAP? There's the trite answer, which is the ones that partner with us, but SAP will give you some specific challenges in terms of where is the metadata, because it's not in the system catalog, so you can't scan the database and find anything of particular value. There's some technical information in there, but nothing that would be of any value to a data catalog user. So you need a specialist way of getting to that metadata. And once you've done that, you then need to be able to curate it and put it into a data catalog. So which data catalogs work best with SAP? Most of the leading ones work with us. So those would be the ones that I would mention, things like Calibre and Elation and Precisely and organizations like that who work with us. If you'd like to know more, please look on our website and get in touch. I think that's the last of the questions. I don't know whether you've got any closing comments, Nicola, or whether we should just wrap up.
I think it just to remind people how valuable metadata is, I think, and that it's equally a business thing and an IT thing. I think the term makes it sound like it's technical, doesn't it, metadata? But I think it's really important that, we need to work with both the business and the IT in your organization.
Absolutely.
To get it done, right? and for it to be valuable. So yeah, I really would encourage people to go and extol the values of it and then the benefits of managing it better in their organizations.
Okay. Thank you very much. And if people want to get hold of you, what's the best way of doing that?
Either through LinkedIn or my website, which is just nicolaaskham.com.
Okay. And if you want to get in touch with us at Silwood, it's silwoodtechnology.com, or again, look us up on LinkedIn or look me up on LinkedIn. So thank you very much indeed, Nicola. It's been a joy talking to you, and hopefully people watching have found some value from it. I'm sure they have. I know I have. So thank you very much. And I think with that, we'll end the call.
Thank you.
Thanks.